everyone. On this episode of Points on the Circle, you get to meet Nalani Wean. Nalani is a senior at Denison University. I really wanted an opportunity to speak to one of the young adults other than my children, and for you to get to know some of the kids, now adults, that have been part of this congregation. Milani was part of a class that graduated 3 or 4 years ago, who was just a dynamic group of kids, and you'll get to see why I chose her to have this conversation. Enjoy. Hey, Nalani, how you doing?
Hey, I'm good. How are you? Nice to see you.
Nice to see you, one of my favorite young adults at Hakafa. How's life back at Denison?
Life is good. Life is busy and restricted, but good.
So talk a little bit about how it is busy and restricted and what it's like being back down there after being off so many months.
Yeah, so it's definitely going a lot better, I think, than I expected. We all live on campus here, so it's been like pretty easy, I think, to mitigate, which is really, really nice. But they basically, what we've been doing is like they brought us back and we kind of had to like quarantine for 2 weeks in terms of like we weren't allowed to leave campus at all. And then they opened it up a little bit. We could go into town just to like get takeout or groceries and like bring them back. And since the first week, they've essentially just been testing everyone randomly. So like every week they'll do between like 100 and 150 tests. They actually never did a mass test, so which was kind of interesting. Yeah. I was definitely a little bit, I think a lot of people were kind of frustrated about that, like when we first got back. But it actually turned out pretty well. We had like 5 cases the first 2 weeks, which like made sense. And then last week they tested like every grade on a different day, and we have had 0 cases since those first
Wow.
5 ones.
Wow.
Yeah.
Have you been kind of like, or people in general on campus, have they been respectful of the limitations? Have they been pushing it? What's it been like?
Yeah, I think it depends, I think, on who you are.
Yeah.
Most people do a pretty good job. We had to like sign what they called a community care agreement. So it had like, 10 different regulations that were basically like, if you don't follow these, we will send you home. And so they've definitely been like, it is somewhat, I think, of a more punitive system than I expected, because they've been sending people home like pretty much every week
Oh, wow.
for violating those. Yeah, so it's things like, we have to wear mask everyone on campus except for if you're like outside and 6 feet apart or your own room. And so that when they see people violating that, they'll have like individual hearings, people who have been leaving campus and like going to Columbus or, inviting people onto campus from outside of school. They have been kind of getting sent home. So most people though are doing a pretty good job. Like they're not sending home anything close to a large percentage of people. But I feel like generally like there's a pretty standard like respect for the fact that like we weren't here for 6 months, and so everyone just wants to be here, and so whatever we have to do to be here is what it is.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's going pretty well though. I think most students we're all used to it now, so it's like, at that point, if you weren't used to it by the time we got back, I feel like that's maybe no one's fault but your own.
Do you have any classes in person?
Yeah,
Okay.
we're doing hybrid, so it's like literally just based off of whether or not the professor wants to do in person. So most of mine are like, if it's a 2-day-a-week class, it's like 2 days in person, 1 day online, or 1 day in person and 1 day online.
So I know your major is rock the world, right? Because
Yeah.
that's what you're going to do. But we're going to get to that in a minute. I want to take us back 4 years ago, but I want to ask a general question because you're a senior now. And
Mm-hmm.
my question for you that I could have asked you years ago is, what's a nice Jewish girl from up here who went to Hakafa doing at Denison University? How'd you end up at Denison? Tell
What
us.
is she doing? I don't know. How did I end up here? Honestly, I was applying to schools, and I think people from the North Shore know, like, especially with New Trier and Loyola and those schools, like, people tend to go to like really big state schools. And so like, I didn't even really I think I applied to Denison. Literally, like my mom and I were sitting looking at colleges, and we were like, small schools that give big scholarships. And like, that was like how we found it. But it's like once I did, it was like everyone and their brother like knew someone who went here. Everyone and their brother went here, and it was like this whole weird thing that kind of like blew up as soon as I even learned the name.
Mhm.
But I feel like I just kind of realized like I work way better both socially and academically and politically in smaller circles. And so I was like, there's no way that I'm going to learn at a bigger school. And if I'm paying for it, then I want to know that I'm learning well. And I feel like I didn't really know what to expect out of it. Like I kind of, it was a little bit based off of the finances. Like they do give, you know, pretty good scholarships, and it ended up being like essentially the same prices in state. But on top of that, I was just like, okay, would I rather go to like U of I Champaign with, you know, 250 people in my classes, or would I rather be sitting in a room with 15 other people and like have a much closer circle, and get a little bit farther from home, even though they're relatively the same in terms of like environment, you know, small Midwestern town.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's kind of how I ended up here. I feel like I feel like my story with Denison is less so like how I ended up here and more like how things have held up, or what I've learned since I've been here. Because coming here was kind of like a random thing.
Yeah, so that's what I want to talk about, because in some respects you went from you really, my perception of you, as you
Hmm.
know, I've told you before, is that you really filled your bubble well here. I mean, you knew you were in the bubble, but you also figured yourself out to the extent that a young woman up to the age of 18 can do that. And then you're sent away to the middle of freaking Southwest Ohio. Is it, did you jump into the same bubble? Is it a different kind of bubble? And how was your North Shore bubble? I hate to call it that, but your
It
little, you know,
is.
how was your
Yeah.
North Shore bubble challenged down there?
I feel like it is similar, I think, because like I mean, just being here, first of all, like the town that we're in is like a relatively upper middle class town. And so even though it's like way smaller than any towns on the North Shore besides maybe like Kenilworth, it is a bubble in that, like, first of all, we're on a hill, so that's a bubble. So sometimes,
Are
you know,
you
I'll
Yellow
find myself,
Spring? You're not
what?
Yellow Spring. You're not Yellow Spring, are you?
No, Granville.
Same thing. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, similar.
Sorry.
Yeah, so we're on a hill, which means, you know, every once in a while I'm like find myself not having left campus for like 2.5 weeks. I'm like, oh my God, I need to leave. But in addition to that, like we are in a bubble in that, like, you know, the area around us is very different from the town that we're actually in, like socioeconomically, demographically, etc. Um, but I do think like one of the differences with people here is, you know, they're coming from all over. Like the school, while it is like a primarily white institution, and it is like a primarily middle class and upper middle class institution in terms of its like student demographics, like the people are just coming from everywhere. And so you have diversity of identity, you have diversity of thought, etc. And like that makes it more likely that like I would get off of campus and do more things outside of that bubble, I think, in comparison to being on the North Shore. Because being on the North Shore, like you kind of almost get like entranced in this like cyclical thing of like, this is my life, this is how it continues. Like I'm not going to kind of venture outside of that. And I feel like even like, you know, when I think about Logie and I, like we were two people who tried to venture outside of that. And coming here, it's like I realized we're barely even like scratched the surface of anything that we could have possibly done. So I feel like just having like a more diverse like community literally like around you, even though like whether that's of identity, of background, of thought, like doesn't really matter, I feel like has just kind of made me like see the bubble better, be more honest about it, and like challenge myself more to leave it. Because no matter where you are, you're going to be in a bubble, your own bubble of whatever your life is, and that's fine as long as you like know that it's there.
What's been challenged most for you,
um
or
Ooh,
most
that's a good
eye-opening? Yeah,
question.
stay there. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like my superiority complex that I think that I had in high school that I thought didn't exist, because I was like, I'm doing good things, like I'm learning new things, like look at me go, like in these different circles. And I kind of got here and I think checked myself a little bit and was like, oh, wait a minute. No, like you can do good things, but that doesn't mean like you are this awesome. You are, like, I am awesome, and I do believe that, and that's self-confidence. But like in terms of like, you know, thinking that like other people who aren't on that same level are somehow like in some vastly different sphere or part of life than me. I think I kind of like got here and immediately checked myself and was like, oh crap. no, like
Say
that
more
is
about
not
that. What do you mean? What do you mean you checked yourself? How was that challenged? Because I worry about fantastic kids like you, young adults like you now. I really do, and it's
yeah,
because because I have so much expectation, but you can't reach. It's all about me, right? You can't reach that expectation if you go from comfortable space to comfortable space.
yeah,
So you need to be knocked down, right? But you know what I
yeah,
mean by that. So how
yeah,
how were you
totally.
say so? Speak to it. How are you addressed immediately? What confronted you? What talk?
Well, I think for the first semester that I was here, I really just became like totally entranced in like college life. You know what I mean? Like in terms of like you meet all these new people and you're taking classes and you're having fun and you're going out and you're like, look at me, I'm in college now. And so I remember my second semester freshman year, I like joined this group that I am now president of, called it's our Coalition for Sexual Respect. So it functions like under the Title IX office here. And essentially we work both like for prevention and education about sexual violence and sexual assault. And I think I joined it and kind of like immediately was like, this is like what had been missing like from my first semester life, was just like being involved with things. And so like at that point I was like, oh crap, like I just forgot that that was even something that I ever did. But I maintained like how good I felt about myself for doing it, even though I wasn't doing the work. And so from that, I was like, wait a minute, I kind of need to like recenter myself. And even beyond that, like with this summer, you know, talking about, for example, with Lohi being in New York and doing a lot of organizing and stuff like in accordance with the Black Lives Matter movement. And even beyond that, like what something that we kind of talked about was that like, I think this is something that I realized, but I couldn't put words to probably until like this past year, was that like just everyone is at a different point in their learning and in their radicalization. And to, you know, like it's one thing for you to fully support, you know, something like an ideal or a value that is, you know, inherently discriminatory or oppressive, but it's another thing for people just to be working towards a spot where someone else already is. And so like for me and Lohi, what we've talked about is that like, you know, we are at completely different points in our radicalization, and I am far quote unquote behind where they are. But like at the same time, I'm only as far as I could ever be right now. And all I can do is work to get farther. And so I think like the combination of realizing those two things kind of put me in my place in terms of like understanding that other people are not in the same space as me, which doesn't mean that they'll never get there, but it means that I need to do the work both for myself to go further and to help others do the same.
So let me just clarify for everybody that doesn't know your older sibling is Lohi.
Yeah.
That's who you're talking about. Um, so you said it twice, and it kind of worries me. The word you're using, worry is a strong word. Why do you need to be radicalized? What do you mean radicalized?
I think just radicalized, in my opinion, is honesty. It's being honest about what's
Why is that
around you,
radical?
about
Why is
your,
that radical?
because people aren't. And so it's a radical idea to have to constantly and fully address like the necessity for that honesty, because I mean there's times we're not honest with ourselves and we're not honest with other people, and we don't see reality for what it is, which means that we can't help to fix anything and to change things. And if you don't see it for what it is, then you can't necessarily change it. And so for me, that's what radicalization is,
Hmm.
you know, constantly, not in a way that is like anxiety inducing in terms of like, oh, I always have to do this, but just, you know, having the thought go through my head every time I like form an opinion. Okay, but like, what is that based on? How can I be more honest about that opinion? And like, what more do I need to learn in terms of actually forming a holistic and genuine like understanding of what's going on here? So no matter what that situation is, I mean, it could be political, it could be literally anything else, it could be with friendship, it could be with relationships, it could be with family. Like, how can I just exist in this space more authentically, and in that sense more radically, like, and be present and be available and like and push for betterness both from myself and from other people.
Well, so I told you once in class, and I know you remember everything I ever talked about with
Of
you,
course.
right? And because I think I gave a sermon about it probably once, that the best thing I ever learned in rabbi school is every situation with another human being should be predicated on three questions: Who are
I do
you?
remember
Who
this.
are you? Who am I? And what are we?
Hmm.
And that's kind of what you're saying. I believe that reality is the space between our perceptions, number
Yeah.
one. And number two, it sounds like you're trying to be woke, which is exhausting.
Well, I see, but I don't even know if I would say that, because I don't think that radicalization has an end. And I think that wokeness is, whether or not we want it to be, it's spatially defined by society. Like, being woke, I mean, there's plenty of people who are woke and still war criminals. Like, so it's kind of like, what does that mean? I don't know. And why is it even defined by anyone? I don't think that it's like pushing towards like a certain end. Like, wokeness doesn't necessarily, I feel like something, people equate wokeness or radicalization to like having a certain political affiliation and that kind of thing. And it might be for some people, and for most people it might be, but for other people, like, I think it's just pushing always to be more honest and be more present in all of the spaces
Oops.
that,
Oops.
yeah, I know. I'm like, what am I thinking about right now? Like, being more present in the spaces that you occupy in order to make sure that you're understanding how you occupy them. And so, like, in that way, I would say, no, I am not pushing to be woke. In fact, I almost equate woke to like this new kind of understanding of liberalism, in that, like, you put a heart at the end of every sentence, and you put your pronouns and you're done, versus like actually doing the work on a daily basis. And so I would say it's not exhausting. It might be exhausting, but it's good exhausting, because you're not necessarily doing it with an end goal in mind. And maybe you are, which is also fine, but it's just like a constant, I mean, it's just life, like, almost in that sense. Like, it's just a continuous thing that you work towards every day. Well, my window is.
Yeah, I need you to turn a little bit. Thank you.
Yeah.
I was about to ask that, but I didn't want to interrupt you because you were on
No,
the
no,
roll.
you're fine.
Okay, so it's so wonderful to hear, because it sounds like you're moving from wanting to do good to wanting to do right.
Mm-hmm.
And that sounds like a real maturation process that I wish all of us went through. Right. So I'm putting words in your mouth. You said about changing. I'm using the word right. Is that a fair word, doing right?
Yeah.
And what does right look like?
I don't know.
To you, what
That's
does
my
it feel
honesty.
like?
My right to me looks like consistency, I think. And so it looks like being consistent as you can, as consistent as your knowledge allows you to be, with like the way that you conduct yourself in your spaces. And so obviously, like, everyone has flaws, and there's that whole phrase, it's like, you can't take your own advice. Like, you can kind of say things and that they're right, but sometimes it's hard to actually act upon them. And so working towards, like, to the best of our capacity, being consistent in our beliefs, in our values, and in how we actually engage with them. Because it's kind of like talking the talk versus walking the walk, right? Like, if you just say it all the time, but you don't actually do it, then you're not doing what's right. You're doing what you think is good. Versus if you fully engage with and participate in those beliefs and follow through with them, then I feel like that to me would be what is right. And so if my belief is, for example, for the liberation of all people, like, something that I have been working on, and I don't necessarily know if this conversation is to progress more in this direction, but like, I've been thinking a lot, especially this summer, about like, okay, we're talking about the liberation of Black lives in the US, right? And of Black Americans and of people across the globe. And so what does that mean for me as a Jew and the liberation of Jewish people? And how does that connect me to the liberation of Palestinian people? And how does that connect me to et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And it goes on and on and on. And you can't fight for one without fighting for all. And so in that way, like, that would be something that I require to do what is right for myself. I require consistency. And
yeah,
so,
but here's the pushback to that. I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead. Finish your sentence.
Okay.
Finish your sentence.
I don't know. I was just going to keep talking.
Here's the pushback to that. Yes, and. right? Two ands, and the and is I agree with you, and at the same time, Palestinian oppression is much different than African American
Oh,
oppression,
yeah.
and so there is intersectionality, but you cannot equate any oppression with another oppression.
No.
You can see how
Yeah.
they intersect, but without working on one, you can't work on this one over here and expect that one to,
Oh,
because it's a
proceed
different
in the same way.
circumstance,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. 100% I agree with
Right.
you. Yes.
Okay, so as you've been analyzing, ooh, that's a great word. As you've been analyzing all of that and how they're all interconnected, what conclusions have you begun to draw?
I think that, that's a hard one. I think that essentially, like, the conclusion that I've made is kind of what I've said earlier, which is just that we are all in the process of blank, and there can be many things that you are in the process of and that you are working towards, but like in this way, like we are all kind of like you have your different directions, and you have different things that you're doing, and different things that you're working towards, but it will always be in the process, and you'll never like reach a point where you're done necessarily. And I think that that's something that, like, probably until the last like 2 years I did not realize
Hmm.
that you could not be like just finished with that work, whatever it might be.
So I'm going to go rabbi on you for one moment,
Go for it.
right? Because everyone misunderstands the very first word of the Bible, right?
Okay.
In Hebrew, Bereshit bara, that's the first two words, which we
Yeah.
always translate in the beginning, God began creating. But in fact, it's actually translated in the beginning of blank. God
Mhm.
began creating. So when you said that blank, we're in the process of blank, whatever you just said, right? Of getting to blank point. It's as if our creation narrative kind of says the exact same thing, that God created this process that's a continual one.
Yeah.
I just went rabbinic on you. You got rabbinic
And
on me.
look
That
at
was
me, I
fantastic.
related it without even knowing.
Oh my God, that's
That's
fantastic.
how deeply rooted it is,
Okay, so tell me,
Like marriage
okay,
connection.
okay, you raised it. So tell me about being a Jew on campus at Denison for you and what it meant leaving here from having it spoon fed to you to being there in which you can ignore it.
Yeah. I think that it's funny. I actually was talking to my roommates about this the other day because we celebrated Rosh Hashanah together, and none of them are Jewish, but we did it anyway. And we were talking about kind of like we do have a Hillel chapter here, and it's relatively small. We are still in Ohio, but they're very close knit, and I think I did ignore it. I think I did for similarly to what I said before, like that first semester that I was here, like I pretty much ignored everything. And I I mean, I enjoy being involved with the Hillel group here because it gives me the space to be around other people who are similar. You know what I mean? Like in a sense that like it's pretty small, but like when I go on Friday nights for Shabbat dinner, like I know who everyone is, and like we all grew up in a similar way, even if it was like in different capacities. Um, but at the same time, like I will say for things like high holiday services and stuff, I actually don't go to the ones that we host here. I tune into the ones that Hakafa does because it feels like really almost like not alien because I know everything, but like, we have visiting rabbis because we don't have a rabbi that's associated with the group on campus, and like all the tunes to everything they're all different, and like the speed and whatever of all of the prayers. And so like I actually kind of exist in this space, I think, between the two, where like I mostly, I think, like connect myself still with Hakafa, but like I bring what I learned there to like a more day-to-day Jewish life in association with like the other Jewish students on campus.
Hmm.
So I feel like it's kind of like this weird, not bad limbo, but like kind of cool limbo where I get to still like keep both connections and like relate them and intertwine them and associate with both of them. But it definitely is interesting. Like I remember the first service that I went to here, I think was my sophomore year. I went to a Rosh Hashanah service and I like felt so strange. and I didn't know what to do. And I was like, oh, like it was great and I liked it, but like not to the same extent. I felt a little bit weird. Um, and so since then I've actually just ended up like kind of tuning into the other, back home a little bit. But yeah, but it's cool. I mean, it's cool to be able to like, with my roommates, for example, like they were like, we know what Rosh Hashanah is, but we don't know what it means. And so because we have to stay in our rooms, we took a whole afternoon and evening to like go through, and I taught them the prayers and we talked through it, and like we celebrated together. So I celebrated Rosh Hashanah with a bunch of people who aren't Jewish, which was cool, and they watched some of the service with me as well, which was nice. So it kind of like creates this almost like these three different like spheres that I can like coexist in.
Have you gotten to a place yet, because you talked about how oppression of African Americans and Black folk here, and oppression, I'll throw in oppression of women, just across of trans folk, all the oppressions we have, you included Palestinian oppression as well. Have you had a sense of our people's oppression? Have you felt that? Has there been a space to acknowledge that? And how does that play out? And it's kind of hard when the narrative is one of Jews as oppressors now to some extent. So have you gotten a sense recently of that, especially in light of our political environment today?
Yeah, I mean, I think I definitely have. We have a pretty good, not pretty good, pretty wide range of like Jewish students here on campus. So we have like students who identify as like Black and Middle Eastern Jews as well. And so like through that, I think like my small little baby Jewish community here like has kind of like manifested its own space to talk about that and like to see the intersections between all of those identities. And so I think that's one of the ways that like I've kind of become more aware of the fact of like the oppression of Jewish people. I also think like with, especially in the last like 6 months, like comments being made by a whole wide variety of people, politicians and athletes and, general like well-known, individuals alike. I've kind of seen groups here, especially like come together like to a higher extent than I did before, I think at home, in the sense that like they will say like we will stand up for ourselves and kind of not allow that. We had a vigil, I remember my sophomore year for the shooting at the synagogue in Pittsburgh. And so like that was really powerful. I even remember I had a teacher, a French professor, and she is Jewish and she's from Russia actually. And she came and we like cried together and it was this whole thing. And so I think there's kind of a lot of different pathways that I have seen that through, but like similarly to how we talk about Jewish history in general, like I see it more through strength, like in community and in individuals and in numbers than through like defeat as a response. Does that make sense? Which I think is cool. And I think that that's something that maybe I just didn't pay attention to as much when I was home. I don't think it's something that wasn't there, but I just think because it was like more normal for me to like not be one of the only Jews on campus. Like there were other people around me who, were the same or similar. It kind of like was not as prevalent, I think, and wasn't like as demanding of my time and attention.
Yes, so to be confronted with that in some way as a vulnerability when you haven't had to, as opposed to your other vulnerabilities. How does that fit into your whole sense of self?
I think that in general, it's made me feel more connected to Judaism and to Jewish values. I think like if I were to really analyze it, like thinking about you and like our relationship, something that you have always kind of instilled in me, and I think in Lohi and, in Kanoa as well as he grows up. My other sibling, just for everyone listening, my younger sibling.
Does he still wear the Denison sweatshirt nonstop? Because I haven't seen him in a while, and I miss that sweatshirt.
I have to get him a new one.
Oh God, I love that sweatshirt. Yeah, I hope he never took it off. Go ahead.
We've always talked about justice as a Jewish value. And I think that being confronted with like both Jewish oppression and community response to that has made me feel more connected, in the sense that like I understand better where my values come from. So even if I'm not necessarily more religious, which I do think I am, but like not to, the most intense extent, like it's probably just, ever so slightly. But I think that it's kind of made me like fully like evaluate like where each of my core beliefs and values has come from. And what I realized was that pretty solid amount of them, like, a lot obviously comes from my parents and my family, but even through that comes through Judaism. And so like I think realizing that kind of made me better understand like how I can then use those values and use Judaism like to my benefit and to others' benefit, like on a more daily basis, rather than just kind of like through something like Sunday school or holiday services, or, like more superficially.
What's your major?
Public health.
Why?
I don't know. I wanted to help people.
Get
And
out
I
of
was
here.
a
Really?
bio major. Yeah. I was a bio major, and I was like, this isn't what I want. And it was not the environment that I enjoyed. And I wanted to work more with people, around people, for people. And so I realized I was like, maybe I need some social sciences in there. So I added international studies, and I was like this crazy double major with a French minor for 2 years. And I realized I was like, I'm not going to graduate on time. So I kind of just put it together. Like, I actually remembered when I was looking at colleges, my mom, like we were sitting with one of the college counselors from New Trier, and I don't even remember who she was. If she's listening, hey girl, what's up? But my mom was like, oh, I think she would do really well in public health. And I had no idea what she was talking about. And I was like, yeah, okay, mom, I'm going to be a bio major, like whatever. And I just remember thinking about it like 2 years later, and I was like, oh, she's right. Like it is the perfect combination of like science and logic, which is a pretty big portion of my brain capacity, and rationality, and also like compassion and empathy and understanding and looking at trends and digging deeper than just science.
So you think in terms of policy? I'm sorry,
what?
finish. I interrupted you. Go ahead. Academically, go ahead.
I was just gonna say academically, that was what I think like kind of appealed to me. Was I was like, oh, it is the liberal arts. Like it is a full mix of, you could be an English major and go get a master's in public health. Like you don't need to kind of start with that, which I thought was really interesting, because it gives like I was saying earlier, like that intense diversity of thought and of background. Like, where are these people coming from? They're coming with the same intention, which is to help and to heal, both, literally and kind of metaphorically, but in, a whole variety of capacities.
So do you want to go policy side, or do you want to go, what do you want to do?
I don't know yet. I'm not
Good.
sure. Probably more towards like social or political science than like, something like epidemiology. But we'll see.
So I want you to react to what I'm about to say to you, because part of me through this conversation now wants to shake you.
Okay.
I want to shake you into your 24-year-old self, not your 21-year-old self.
Okay.
And here's why I want to shake you, and why, because we've talked about it a few times in various places here. When you just said about wanting to work for people, and you talked before about wanting to help people, and that's how your orientation's been. And we talked about going from doing what's good to doing what's right. Is that at what point are you going to start seeing, this sounds very, I mean, I want you to react. This is my reaction, okay? Mm-hmm. That until you don't want to be working for people, but working with people, right? That the most active state in terms of what you were getting at before was the most active state of doing is being present. Mm-hmm. Which sometimes involves engagement and sometimes involves stepping back.
Mm-hmm.
so that you come to it as a partner, as a with instead of a for.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because, so I want you to react to this, because working for people, helping people is charity.
Yeah.
Right? And so so respond to what I just said, that I want to shake you into your
Yeah.
24-year-old self,
No,
but take your time.
I fully agree. And I think that, so, okay, so context. So in my global health class right now, we're learning about liberation theology, which is essentially what, like, you focus on the needs of the oppressed based on like what they tell you they need, instead of something like charity, which kind of comes in and gives but doesn't necessarily give the right thing and then leaves and is not sustainable and is not constructive. And so we're talking about liberation theology and how it plays into global health and how it plays into the way that our national and international institutions interact with poor people in particular, and how they don't listen to what poor people need or want in order to thrive, and instead just, kind of push and project onto them. And so I think in that way, and so in that conversation, something that we've discussed a lot is language, and how language can really affect like the way that we are perceived and the way that we perceived others. And so I actually think you're fully right, and I fully agree with you. And I would do so much as to like go back and take back my statements of no, seriously, because you're right. Like saying that you want to help people or work for people is different than saying that you want to exist as a resource that can be used for others to build a sustainable future for themselves.
Which is even a tricky thing to say,
Which is
right?
even a tricky thing to say.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Don't take it back. No. Look, this is the trajectory. Go on.
But I'm going to say though, like, it's not me taking it back in the sense that like, that I don't want to help people anymore, or in the sense that like, I'm saying that I was wrong for saying that. But I do think I take it back in the sense that I think that you're right for challenging me, because I think it doesn't reflect what I'm looking for, or what I'm striving for. I can't talk.
You're one of those empaths, right? And it's really important. And it's really important for empaths to be able to grow through the empathy, to be able to maximize it. Because if you can channel it in such a way that it's not pity,
yeah,
right? Because you'll get sucked into that pity and you'll just right,
exactly.
and not turn it into self-righteous anger. Right? But to find that space in between, that's really hard to navigate.
Yeah.
Right? You'll be able to do what you need to do in this world so that I can actually retire with a big smile on my face because of everything that you're doing.
Exactly.
It's all about me, you know that.
I think it's mostly just about listening. Like at its core, like I think that doing that kind of work is really just about kind of like what you said, like knowing the moments when you step up and knowing the moments when you step back. And I think right now, especially with both public and global health, I think it's time for a lot of the people who are in positions of power or authority to take a step back. And I think that it has always been that time, but I think right now more than ever, especially like knowing people my age who are going into the field, like it's something that I think we will demand from those who have done the work before us. And I think that like it's going to be weird and rough, but I think that it's necessary. And I am like, that's one of the reasons that I think I've stuck with that major, like both academically and personally, is just because like I've seen the people who are going to be in it and I've worked with them now, and I'm like, okay, yeah, like that's what I'm looking for, and that's the environment that I want to be in and that I want to contribute to, but contribute to the extent that like I exist as a resource, who can help others like constructively and sustainably create a better environment for themselves.
Yeah, and again, if not a resource, just exist as you and everything that you are.
Yeah.
I got 3 more questions for you.
Okay.
Do you consider yourself an activist?
yes, but I don't really have a definition for what that means. Does that
Do
make
you,
sense?
do you aspire to be one?
Yeah, I think so. I feel like, again, like in the capacity that I exist in right now, and in what I do and what I think and what I like even just talk with people about on a daily basis, yes. In a broader sense, I think that there's more I could do to more holistically like fit under what we have defined like as an activist as a society. But I don't know, like I feel like for myself, like I don't really know what my personal definition of it would be, but I would hope that I'm at least, working towards it.
Hmm. Question number 2.
Yeah.
Do you consider yourself a feminist?
Yes.
What does that mean?
Um, I think it means I actually read something recently about it was about bringing back the word radical feminism. Um, and there was a really interesting quote from it. I wish I had it in front of me, but it said something like, to be a feminist, you have to fully and wholly love all women and all people. And in a sense that like, even if whether it's a romantic love or like a more like mental or social or physical love, like in any and every capacity that it can exist in, like that is what feminism is. um and so I would say yeah, because I think that under that definition, yes, and also because I obviously believe in equity for all people and etc.
So what I'm hearing, that does your feminism include space for women who, in the name of actualizing their values, are values that are anathema to you? Anti-choice women, uh, women who are making it to the nomination of the Supreme Court that might not stand for anything that you believe in. Do you have space in your definition of feminism for them, or no? Or do you answer?
Yeah, I think so. I think I do. I don't know necessarily that I would consider them feminists, but I also don't know that it's my right to define anyone else as a feminist. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think that that's necessarily under my jurisdiction. So whether or not whether I consider them a feminist would even matter in that situation, I don't know. But yeah, I would say if you're going to define it as fully loving all women and beyond that all people, then yeah, it would have to, because I don't think it could otherwise. I don't necessarily think that what they do or believe is right under my capacity of what is right, but I think that I couldn't consider myself to be a feminist under that definition if I didn't.
Final question.
Yes.
I feel like I'm just throwing 20 questions at you.
That's
Final
what I'm
question. I want you to think about 20 years from now.
doing.
41-year-old Nalani. Tell me about the America of 41-year-old Nalani. What does it look like? Honestly.
I don't know. What does it look like? I think I think that I could describe all of the like more obvious things, such as equitable care for all people, whether that is community care, health care, you know, career related care, resources, etc., um, environmental care, like all of that. I think that would be more of like an obvious answer.
That's not
But
what I
I
asked.
think, yeah, but like, I think that the ideal America for me in 20 years is reflective in the sense that we base our decisions like on an honest analysis of our past. And so hopefully what that would result in is equitable treatment of everyone, if that makes sense. And so that would kind of be the outcome of a social shift in a mindset where we are like honest about our mistakes and we reflect upon them and we move forward in a way that only pushes us to be better. And again, like then all of those other things would hopefully come as a result.
Do you think that could happen in 20 years?
Yeah.
Sure, why not? Of course, why not?
I think it can. That's something that I have faith in. So
Good.
Whether or not it's grounded in anything, I don't know, but it's there.
So the reason I asked you to be this interview, or just to have this talk with you, not only because, well, one reason is because I love talking with you, as you know that. We joked when you were in junior and senior year, mostly sophomore and junior year, how your class was the terror of religious school for so many years, right? And yet, the final 4 or 5 of you, so it was you and Ben and Rose and Franny, and who am I missing? I'm missing 1 or 2 more. But the core of the 4 of you plus the person I'm missing, and if they're watching this, I'm so sorry, have become such incredible stars, right? Just bright stars and really beautiful, thoughtful, grounded human beings that I wanted Hakafa to have a chance to see just what happens when a group of thoughtful people come together and create community. And you're such an important part of that to me. So thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, of course. I'm happy to always. And I always, that I love talking just as much as you do.
So when you're up here next time and we can actually get together, let's do it, can we?
Let's do it.
Okay. And do me a favor. I want you to get another sweatshirt for your brother and tell him to jaunt past my house wearing it so I can see him.
I will.
I want you to tell Loie that it was so great to see her on your phone, second day Rosh Hashanah. And I want you to hug your parents for me, and let's just be in touch, okay?
Okay, sounds good.
All right. Hey, so that's the end of this episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.